Sometimes, some areas of our lives are just a hot mess. It could be your finances, it could be a relationship, it could be your job situation. So here's the question for you today. Have you ever made a mess messier? That is, in trying to clean up the mess in your life, you actually made the mess worse. Now, for me, if I think back, a mess that I made messier, there's one that I'll just never forget. You see, our son was like 4. My wife had brought him home from a haircut, and she mentioned how much it costs, and I kind of lost it. I was like, we can't pay that much to cut a 4-year-old's hair. You should just cut it. And she was like, there's no way. I don't know how to do that. I'm like, how hard could it be? Come on. She's like, it's hard. It's harder than you think. And me, kind of knowing nothing and not even having hair, I'm like, well, I'll do it then. So sure enough, a month later it comes and it's time to cut his hair, and I said I would do it. So I sit him on this stool in the kitchen, and I have a hair clippers and a scissors, and I start clipping a little bit at the top, and I decide I'm going to make it nice and tight over his ears and in the back, and sadly I just kept screwing it up. There were little bare spots and bald spots, and I kept having to cut it shorter and shorter to fix it, and I was trying so hard to make it look nice, but in the end I kind of just had to shave it off, because it was just a mess, right? And so I shave it off, and now I'm heartbroken, because I look at my 4-year-old boy, and it was fall, it was just back to school time, and he was still all tan from summer. So it almost looked like he had like a white skull cap on his head with his haircut. I was so embarrassed. I actually looked at him and I wanted to cry. He looked like he was unhealthy. It was just terrible. I had to take him to preschool the next day, and I noticed all the adults looking at him, and I was just frustrated, right? Like the adults would look at him and I was like, why are you looking at my kid? And then I felt the need to explain it to every one of them. Like, well, I started the haircut, blah-de-blah, and I had to tell them the story just to sort of account for why my kid's hair was so screwed up. I'll never forget it. It's kind of funny. You probably have your own goofy stories too, but sometimes when we try to clean up messes we make, the results aren't so goofy. They're not funny. They don't go away. They just get worse. Like when you make a financial mess messier, or when you make a relationship mess messier, or when you make a professional mess or an academic mess messier. And I could go on and on, right? When you make an important mess messier, the whole rest of your life can be messier too. And instead of funny, it's just painful. But if it's so painful, why do we do it? Like I should have learned my lesson before, and you probably should have too, but we still do it sometimes. So here's the reason. Here's why I think we make messes messier in our lives. It's because every mess that you make, and every mess that you're involved in, whether it's you made it yourself or someone dumped it on you, you marry into a mess, you date into a mess, you inherit a mess, you work at a mess, no matter what it is, every mess comes with some bad options for cleanup. Now, maybe your mess has caused you to borrow more, or lie bigger, or hide, or make up a story, or send another text to make it sound like the first text really wasn't meant for them. There are always some really bad options that come with trying to clean up every mess. And these bad options essentially just make that mess in your whole life messier. I don't want you to choose to make yours messier. I don't want you to make your life messier. Now, I've run through some of these bad options, but consider there's good options too. First of all, remembering that everyone has messes in their life is your first good option to choose when you have a mess you want to clean up. You got to remember that everyone has messes, right? So, as you remember that, we have to review last time we talked and we said, what can be done about a hot mess? Well, first of all, you just say, nobody's perfect, right? You just look at the mirror and you say, nobody's perfect. You say, I've made mistakes. We all make mistakes. Welcome to the human race. It just means you're alive. In the Bible, Jesus had a brother. His name was James. He's Jesus' little brother. Can you imagine being Jesus' little brother? Can you imagine every time you screw up, well, Jesus never got an F on a test. Jesus was never naughty. Can you imagine being James and being Jesus' little brother? James becomes an adult and he's a follower of Jesus, but he does say in the Bible, in chapter 3 of his book, he says, we all make many mistakes, right? It's biblical. God knows we make lots of mistakes. It's okay, whether it's an 80s fashion mistake in your past or even Einstein. Einstein at one point said tobacco was good for you. He was Einstein, right? Little did he know. There's this other guy, Solomon, known to be super wise from thousands of years ago. Solomon writes this book called Ecclesiastes. And in Ecclesiastes, Solomon says, there's not a single person in the whole world that doesn't screw up. He says everyone screws up at some point. That's just the way life is. Now, he knew that thousands of years ago, and you know that today. You know that everyone makes mistakes. So allow that into your own life. Allow mistakes to happen, and you just look at the mirror and say, you know what? Everyone makes mistakes. I'm okay. You got to look in the mirror and decide, you know what? I've made many mistakes before in my life. I got to look in the mirror and say, you know what? I've got some messes in my life right now, and I got to look in the mirror and say, I'm going to make mistakes in the future. You see, messes can be embarrassing, but they're not fatal. And realizing your mess isn't fatal is the essential first step to being emotionally and spiritually healthy. Now, if you're a little bit older, you're going to get this immediately. You maybe haven't thought of it this way, but there's a reality in life that you understand. And if everyone can remember this, it's going to help you so much. Here it is. If you're older, you understand this. You see, eventually, the mess that you're currently experiencing in life, eventually that mess that you're currently in, it's going to be reduced to 1 or 2 sentences. The season of your life that you would say, oh, it's so painful, it's so horrible, it's so complicated, this season of my life, there's a day that's going to come when an entire season of your life will be reduced to 1 or 2 sentences. It might be something like this. You might say something like, 5 years ago, I went through a really terrible divorce. 1 sentence. All the pain, all the suffering of the divorce, 1 sentence. Yes, 5 years ago, I went through a really tough divorce. Or you might say 4 years ago, I had to declare bankruptcy. All the events surrounding the bankruptcy become 1 sentence. 3 years ago, I got arrested. 2 years ago, I had to drop out of school. You see, all these giant life events, all these painful messes, eventually, they're just a sentence. Eventually, they're just a sentence or 2. You see, your real story, the real story of your life, isn't your mess. Once you're in a mess, it's there. There's nothing you can do about it, right? You can't unscramble eggs. Your real story isn't your mess. Your real story, the story of your life, is your response. Don't miss this now. The response to the mess in your life becomes your story. You see, you can't control a lot of hard things that happen in your life. You make your own mistakes, plus other things come in. You can't control it all the time. But you can always control the way you respond. When people hear that you went through a relationship mess 4 years ago, what story is it that you want to tell coming out of that mess? When people discover that you had to declare bankruptcy or you're in the midst of it right now, what's the story you want to tell as a result of the options you chose coming out of your financial mess? Sure, you dropped out of school, but the question is, what's your story? What did you do as a result? Which option did you choose? Because your response to your mess, that becomes your story. And you have options as you live out your story. So your mess isn't your story. Your response becomes your story. Which of your options do you want to become a permanent part of your story? Don't make your life messier. Don't blame someone else for your mess and never recover. The best response you can have is to first take ownership. You just look in the mirror and you say, nobody's perfect. And then you ask God for help. He understands. Ask him to help. And then as you do, write out your 3 to 7 mess recovery plan, right? 3 to 7 steps for mess recovery. Write it out. Ask someone you respect to help you make your mess recovery plan. Ask someone you respect to review it with you. Here's how I'm going to get out of this mess. Here's the plan, and talk to someone that you respect. Maybe it's us here at Academy. I don't know. But make sure you have somebody that helps you plan out your recovery so that you can live the life you want to live. Take your first step today. Do it. Do it today.